Every morning, millions of people do the same thing. They wake up tired and reach for coffee. Most couldn't tell you why it works. They just know it does. The fog lifts. The mind clears. But here's what's strange. Coffee doesn't give you energy. It doesn't add anything your body doesn't already have. What it does is more subtle, more clever. And most people who drink it every day have no idea what's actually happening inside their brain. This isn't about caffeine being good or bad. This is about the mechanism itself. The chemistry running in the background every time you take a sip. Your brain has systems for managing energy, attention, and wakefulness. Coffee doesn't power those systems, it interferes with them. The alertness, the focus, the jitters, the crash that comes later. All of it traces back to one simple interaction, one molecule blocking one receptor. This is coffee. And most people don't know what it's actually doing. Coffee is the most widely consumed psychoactive substance on the planet. More than 2 billion cups are drunk every day. And yet most people treat it like it's neutral. Like it's just a warm drink, a morning ritual. But coffee is a drug. Not in a dramatic way, not in a dangerous way for most people. But in a literal chemical sense, it's a substance that alters how your brain works. The problem is that familiarity creates blindness. When something is everywhere, when everyone does it, it stops looking like what it is. Coffee becomes invisible. The effects become normal. This matters because your brain is running on finely tuned systems. Systems for sleep, wakefulness, focus, and energy. Coffee doesn't just give you a boost. It shifts the entire balance. And when you don't understand the shift, you can't see what's happening. You can't see why the crash comes. You can't see why tolerance builds. You can't see why stopping suddenly feels so difficult. And here's the other part. Most of what people believe about coffee is wrong. Not completely wrong, but wrong in the details. People think caffeine gives you energy. It doesn't. People think the caffeine is out of your system in a few hours. It's not. People think coffee dehydrates you. It doesn't, at least not the way they think. These misunderstandings shape how people use coffee, how much they drink, when they drink it, whether they think about it at all. And in most cases, the misunderstanding comes from confusing the feeling with the mechanism. Coffee feels like energy, so people assume it is energy. But feeling and reality aren't the same thing. So this isn't about convincing you to change anything. It's about accuracy. It's about seeing what's actually happening. Because once you know the mechanism, the rest makes sense. To understand what coffee does, you need to understand what your brain is doing when you're tired. Tiredness isn't random. It's not just your body running low on energy, it's a signal. And that signal is built on chemistry. While you're awake, your brain is working. Neurons are firing. Connections are forming. Energy is being used. And as that happens, a molecule called adenosine starts to accumulate. Adenosine is a byproduct. It's created when your brain breaks down ATP, the molecule that powers cellular activity. The longer you stay awake, the more adenosine builds up. And as it builds, it starts binding to receptors in your brain. When adenosine binds to these receptors, it slows things down. It reduces neural activity. It makes you feel drowsy. This is your brain's way of saying, you've been awake long enough. Time to rest. This system works in the background, all day, every day. You don't control it. You don't think about it. It just runs. And under normal conditions, it regulates your sleep-wake cycle perfectly. That's where coffee comes in. Caffeine, the active compound in coffee, has a very specific shape. And that shape happens to be similar to adenosine. Similar enough that caffeine can fit into the same receptors. But here's the key part. Caffeine doesn't activate those receptors. It just blocks them. When you drink coffee, caffeine floods your bloodstream. It crosses into your brain. And it starts occupying adenosine receptors before adenosine can get there. The result is simple. Adenosine is still being produced. It's still accumulating. But it can't deliver its signal. The receptors are blocked. So even though your brain has been awake for hours, even though the adenosine is there, you don't feel tired. This is what people call the caffeine boost. But it's not a boost. It's a block. You're not gaining energy. You're masking fatigue. The adenosine is still there. The tiredness is still there. You just can't feel it. And this is critical to understand because it explains everything else. It explains why the effect wears off. It explains why you crash. It explains why you build tolerance. It explains why some people feel nothing from coffee while others feel wired. It all comes back to this one interaction. Caffeine blocking adenosine receptors. That's the foundation. Everything else is a consequence. So when you drink coffee, you're not adding fuel. You're temporarily preventing your brain from registering how tired it actually is. When you drink coffee, caffeine doesn't stay in your stomach. It's absorbed quickly. Within about 15 to 45 minutes, it peaks in your bloodstream. And almost immediately, it starts crossing the blood-brain barrier. This barrier exists to protect your brain from harmful substances. But caffeine is small enough to pass through. Once it's in, it gets to work. At first, you might not feel anything. That's because adenosine receptors don't all get blocked at once. It happens gradually. As more caffeine molecules arrive, more receptors get occupied, and as that happens, the adenosine signal weakens. This is when most people start to notice the effect. The fog lifts, thoughts feel sharper, tasks feel easier. But here's what's actually happening. Your brain isn't working better. It's working the same. What's changed is the signal telling it to slow down. That signal has been muted. This also triggers secondary effects. When adenosine receptors are blocked, other neurotransmitters start to increase. Dopamine, the molecule associated with motivation and pleasure. Norepinephrine, which drives alertness and focus. Serotonin, which affects mood. These increases are indirect. Caffeine doesn't create these molecules. But by blocking adenosine, it removes a brake. And when the brake is off, activity in those systems goes up. This is why coffee feels good. It's not just wakefulness. It's a shift in brain chemistry that makes you feel more motivated, more focused, more positive. But all of this is still built on blocking a signal, not enhancing a function. The peak of caffeine's effect usually happens around 30 to 60 minutes after consumption. This is when the highest number of adenosine receptors are blocked. And this is when people feel the strongest sense of alertness. But the effect doesn't last forever. And it doesn't keep increasing. Caffeine has what's called a half-life. For most people, that half-life is about 5 to 6 hours. This means that after 5 hours, about half the caffeine you consumed is still in your system. After 10 hours, about a quarter remains. After 15 hours, an eighth. So if you drink coffee at 8 a.m., there's still caffeine in your brain at 2 p.m., at 8 p.m., at 11 p.m. Even when you don't feel it anymore, it's there. What changes is the level. As caffeine gets metabolized and cleared from your bloodstream, receptors start to free up. Adenosine, which has been waiting, starts to bind again. And as it does, the tiredness signal returns. This is where the plateau happens. You stop feeling more alert. You stop feeling the boost, but you're not crashing yet. You're just back to baseline. The coffee is no longer blocking enough receptors to make a difference. For some people, this feels fine. For others, it feels like the effect wore off too quickly. And that's when they reach for another cup. But here's the problem. The adenosine didn't go anywhere. It's been building the entire time. And now, there's more of it than there would have been without coffee. When caffeine wears off, adenosine floods back. This is the crash. And it's not just a return to normal tiredness, it's often worse. Because while caffeine was blocking receptors, your brain kept producing adenosine. So now there's a backlog. All that accumulated adenosine starts binding at once. Receptors that were blocked for hours are suddenly open. And the signal they send is strong. Stronger than it would have been if you hadn't consumed caffeine in the first place. This is why people feel exhausted after the caffeine wears off. It's not withdrawal, not yet. It's just the natural tiredness that was delayed, now hitting all at once. Some people respond by drinking more coffee, and this works temporarily. More caffeine blocks the receptors again. The crash is postponed. But the adenosine is still there, still building. This cycle can repeat throughout the day. Coffee in the morning, another cup at lunch, maybe another in the afternoon. Each one delays the crash. Each one adds to the backlog. And here's the part most people don't realize. The adenosine doesn't reset until you sleep. Sleep is when your brain clears it out. So if you're drinking coffee late in the day, you're blocking receptors at a time when your brain is supposed to be winding down. You're interfering with the signal that tells you it's time to sleep. And when you finally do sleep, the quality is often worse. This creates a feedback loop. Poor sleep leads to more tiredness. More tiredness leads to more coffee. More coffee leads to poorer sleep. If you drink coffee every day, your brain adapts. This isn't unique to caffeine. This is what brains do. When a receptor is blocked consistently, the brain compensates. It builds more receptors. Over time, regular coffee drinkers develop more adenosine receptors than they had before. This means more binding sites, more places for adenosine to attach, and more places caffeine needs to block to create the same effect. This is tolerance, and it happens gradually. So gradually that most people don't notice it building. At first, 1 cup of coffee feels strong, clear, effective. But after weeks or months of daily consumption, that same cup feels normal. It doesn't create the same boost. It just makes you feel awake. To get the original effect, you need more caffeine. A 2nd cup. A stronger brew. A larger size. And for a while that works. But the brain keeps adapting. More receptors. More tolerance. Eventually, coffee stops feeling like a boost at all. It just feels like maintenance you needed to feel normal. Without it, you feel worse than you did before you ever started drinking it. This is where the line blurs. Is the coffee helping you, or are you just avoiding withdrawal? For some people, this doesn't matter. They're fine with the routine. But for others, it becomes a dependency they didn't plan on. And here's the thing. The tolerance is reversible. If you stop drinking coffee, the extra receptors eventually downregulate. The brain resets. But that process takes time. And during that time, the withdrawal is real. Fatigue, headaches, irritability, difficulty concentrating. All of it traces back to those extra receptors now flooded with adenosine. Not everyone processes caffeine the same way. Some people drink coffee at 9 p.m. and fall asleep an hour later. Others drink it at noon and lie awake at midnight. Some people feel wired after 1 cup. Others feel nothing after 3. This variation comes down to genetics. Specifically, genes that control how fast your liver breaks down caffeine. The enzyme responsible is called CYP1A2. Some people have a version of this gene that makes the enzyme work quickly. These are fast metabolizers. For them, caffeine clears out of the bloodstream in 3 to 4 hours. The effect is strong but short-lived. Other people have a version that works slowly. These are slow metabolizers. For them, caffeine can linger for 8 hours or more. The effect is prolonged, and so are the side effects. This is why one person can drink coffee all day with no sleep issues, while another person feels jittery and anxious from a single cup. It's not willpower. It's not sensitivity in the psychological sense. It's metabolism. It's biology. There's also variation in receptor density. Some people naturally have more adenosine receptors. For them, caffeine has less of an effect, because there are more receptors to block. Others have fewer receptors, so even a small amount of caffeine makes a noticeable difference. None of this is visible. You can't tell by looking at someone how they metabolize caffeine. You can't tell how many receptors they have. The only way to know is through experience or genetic testing. But this explains why advice about coffee is so inconsistent. What works for one person doesn't work for another, because the underlying biology is different. Most people believe caffeine gives you energy. This is the biggest misunderstanding. Caffeine doesn't create energy. It doesn't provide fuel. It doesn't add ATP or glucose or anything your cells use to function. What it does is mask the signal that tells you you're running low. Think of it this way. If your car's fuel gauge is broken and stuck on full, you don't have more gas. You just can't see that you're running out. That's what caffeine does. It breaks the gauge. Another common belief is that caffeine dehydrates you. This comes from the fact that caffeine is a mild diuretic. It makes you urinate more. But the amount of water in a cup of coffee more than compensates for the water lost. Studies show that coffee contributes to daily hydration, not against it. People also think the caffeine is mostly gone after a few hours. This is only half true. Yes, half of it is gone after 5 or 6 hours. But that means half is still there. And that remaining caffeine is still active, still blocking receptors, still affecting sleep, even if you don't feel wired. There's also the idea that drinking coffee regularly is harmless because it's natural. Coffee is natural. But so is tobacco, so is alcohol. Natural doesn't mean without effect. Caffeine is a psychoactive drug. It changes brain chemistry. That's not inherently bad, but it's not neutral either. And then there's the belief that stopping coffee will permanently damage your energy levels. This isn't true. Withdrawal is real and uncomfortable, but temporary. After a week or two, the brain adapts. Energy levels return to baseline. The fatigue you feel without coffee isn't permanent. It's just the removal of a borrowed boost. These misunderstandings aren't trivial. They shape how people use coffee, how much they drink, when they drink it, whether they think about it at all. And in most cases, the misunderstanding comes from confusing the feeling with the mechanism. Coffee feels like energy, so people assume it is energy. But feeling and reality aren't the same thing. Here's what changes when you understand this. Coffee isn't good or bad, it's a tool. And like any tool, it works best when you understand what it actually does. If you know that caffeine blocks adenosine, you can see why drinking it late in the day disrupts sleep. Not because you feel wired, but because the receptors are still blocked when your brain is trying to wind down. If you know that tolerance builds over time, you can see why the effect weakens. And you can decide whether you're okay with that, or whether you want to cycle off occasionally to reset. If you know that the crash comes from accumulated adenosine, you can see why chasing the feeling with more coffee just delays the problem. And you can decide whether that delay is worth it. This isn't about quitting coffee. It's about seeing the system clearly. Some people benefit from coffee. It helps them focus. It helps them work. It fits their lifestyle and their biology. For them, understanding the mechanism just means using it more effectively. Other people realize they've been using coffee to cover up poor sleep, or stress, or a schedule that doesn't align with their natural rhythm. For them, understanding the mechanism is the first step toward changing something deeper. But in both cases, the clarity matters. Because when you don't know what's happening, you can't make informed decisions. You're just reacting. Just reaching for the cup because that's what you do. And here's the other part. Once you see that caffeine is blocking a signal rather than adding energy, you start to notice other signals your body sends. Hunger, stress, fatigue. You start to ask whether you're listening to those signals or just masking them, and that question extends beyond coffee. So that's coffee, not a source of energy, not a harmless habit, not a simple boost. A molecule that blocks a receptor. A substance that interferes with your brain's natural system for managing wakefulness and sleep. A drug that feels helpful but works by masking what's actually happening. For some people, that's exactly what they need. For others, it's a dependency they didn't see coming. But now you know the mechanism. You know what caffeine does. You know why the crash happens. You know why tolerance builds. You know the difference between real energy and borrowed alertness. And you can decide for yourself what to do with that information. Whether you keep drinking coffee, whether you cut back, whether you pay more attention to when and why you reach for it. This was hidden. Now it's uncovered.